Hello everybody, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world today. It's time for another episode of Train Talk from Milepost 141. That's our SoundTraxx Soundbites blog. No,
not blog.
I keep doing this.
I know, and I've had to reprimand you before for it.
Yeah, I know. That's okay. What would you do with the good dog? Slap him on the nose? So
that'll probably just make the problem worse, because you keep saying it all ties back to getting hit in the head a lot from hockey.
Yeah, well,
we have to find alternate methods.
Well, to be fair, and maybe I've said this before, but our Soundbites, the name Soundbites was part of our originally blog.
You have said this before.
And so in my mind, I keep thinking blog, but I know it's our podcast.
It's a podcast, yes.
I just got to remember the right words. Words are failing me this time, so... Anyway, for those of you guys who are new to our podcast, first of all, welcome, and where have you been? There's a lot of great episodes you can get caught up on watching on the various platforms you can watch your podcasts or listen to your podcasts. For those of you guys who are new, my name is George Bogatuk. I've been with the company now 16 years, the end of this month, which we're recording this towards the end of October. So about a week or so, I turned 16 years with the company.
Okay.
And then next to me is Norman Carnaby. He's our support tech.
Rep. I've been here almost 3 years.
Yeah.
Getting up there.
Almost 3 years. And I tell you what, the time's flown by.
I know.
For many reasons, because when you're here. Because you've got such a great rapport and a great, ability to handle a lot of that. It frees me up to be able to do other stuff, that I'm supposed to do with talking with retailers, things like that. So for many, many times over, I'll say thank you for that. So, but guys, I know he's been, if you've talked to him on the phone, you know how spectacular this guy is to being able to talk to you. So we're happy to have him here. So anyway, with that, why can't I rail a truck? My God. I just happened to look down and realized it was not on the track.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So let's talk about our latest project, shall we?
Sure. You go first this week.
So many of you guys know me as a Missouri Pacific modeler. I model 1978 Missouri Pacific. Now what I have here on the table is significantly different from a Missouri Pacific model. This is actually a Rio Grande SD40T-2, and this is actually one of the scale trains models that they've done. It's unnumbered, and I've actually realized I ran out of time. I was doing this one for the joint Missouri Pacific Historical Society along with the Rio Grande Modeling and Historical Society. And I was doing this project because I was doing a presentation there at the show or at the weekend, basically operations.
Yeah.
I was going to talk about, how the different railroads handled their operations, and I brought some examples of all of them, including steam and diesel and in this particular case. But there's some lettering that's missing on this one. For you Grand fans, you probably already noticed it, but there's no number here on the long hood, and I never did put a number here on the back. I just sort of ran out of time, but my number boards are numbered and ready to go. I just, like I said, just flat out ran out of time.
Yeah.
So, but the point of it wasn't so much to show this, it was to really show off the lighting.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of lights that are coming on a lot of these models nowadays, and I wanted to show more prototypically how they would be shown on the real world. And in this clinic, it was an operations clinic more showing how to operate your locomotives following railroad practices. And one of the things, for example, we talked about was on the Missouri Pacific, they didn't have dynamic brakes. Now, for those... Wow, let me try to say that again.
Do you want me to take over for the dynamic brake explanation?
I was just going to say, for those of you who don't know what dynamic brakes are, this is what's called the dynamic brake blister. And inside here is for those of you listening, it's on the top center of the long hood here. It's a dynamic brake blister. The
Yeah,
sides kind of bow out a
It's
little
the piece
bit.
that flares out to the sides.
It has a couple of fans on top of it.
Yeah.
And the way the diesel engine works is the diesel engine generates electricity, and the electricity is run down to electric motors on the axles that actually turn the wheels. And so there's no direct gearing from the prime mover. Otherwise, they'd shear all the mechanics off just because of the sheer tonnage. Let's see how many times I can fit sheer into a sentence. But anyway, so when it was going uphill, it was generating electricity, and electricity was turning the wheels and pulling the train. But when it's descending the grade, the engineers would turn those into electric generators, and it's that electromechanical resistance of the wheels of the electric motors generating electricity that would slow and keep the train under control. But that electrical energy had to be dissipated somewhere, and so up in the dynamic brake blister, you would have resistors, and the fans would draw air across the resistor grid to make sure that they didn't overheat.
Yeah.
That was a very long conversation to get to the point that the Missouri Pacific and most of their locomotives did not have dynamic braking. And so the Missouri Pacific did what they called power braking. And power braking was what they would do is they would actually throw their engines into notch 8 and then set the automatic. And the reason for that was so that the engines were pulling against the cars and the cars were dragging the locomotives to a stop. The reason was to keep the couplers tight, because the Missouri Pacific was a Granger railroad. It was mostly flat. I mean, there were some hills here and there, but for the most part, it was a flat railroad. And so the reason for the couplers being tight was so that when you're starting, first off, there's none of those big jerks as the knuckles pull out. But then number two was that, and this is the running joke that I tell people in my clinics, that the grade detector, which is, for those of you guys listening in, this is the conductor sitting in the caboose, riding with his head bobbing back and forth, half asleep. But the point was so that the ride in the caboose was a smoother ride as they're coming to a stop, because as those cars are coming in, the slack's coming in and out, it makes for a really rough ride. And so that's how the Missouri Pacific did it. And so the point of the clinic was to show off a lot of those cool things.
Okay.
Now, also, the Missouri Pacific apparently, and I learned a lot more about this over the past few weekends here, a few weekends ago at the Mopac Society.
Get the tenses right.
Well, the Missouri Pacific and the Rio Grande had a great partnership, and there was at some point talks of them merging, and I would have been perfectly happy because the Grande's actually one of my second favorite railroads.
Well, of course, the other railroad you model is Civil War era. So
yeah, I do dabble in some of that, but I'm never going to have a layout fully dedicated to that. As much as I would love to, I'm just probably not going to do it. I've got way too much of this era.
Yeah.
So anyway, the point being, or the reason I have this model is not only is it freaking cool looking, but it was also done as an interchanged model to run with the Mopac coal trains coming in on where I'm eventually modeling, which is called the White River Route. And part of the other reason I brought this model was to talk about the lighting. As I mentioned, there's of course the standard class lights and things like that a lot of people don't realize that class lights aren't just pretty lights that were put up on the front of the locomotive. A lot of times
they had purpose to them.
They had purpose. I mean, so we see people with red and green and clear, which are the normal colors of class lights. But in a diesel era, in this particular time frame, they didn't really use the green ones hardly at all, because green indicated that this was a scheduled train with a following section. If this was the scheduled train with no following section, the class lights would have been extinguished because, well, this is just the scheduled train, just get out of the way. And so, but by the time most of the diesels were about this era, second generation diesels, most of them were pretty much extras anyway. So the only ones you would really have would be clear. Now, the exception to that is if you're pushing on the rear end of a caboose, then you could display red on the rearward facing of your locomotive. But it varies just depending on what you're doing.
Yeah.
Anyway, talking about the different class lights, and so those type of things weren't used a lot unless, like I said, you were pushing on the caboose. But pushing on the caboose is a pretty dangerous practice in general, especially if you got with the Grand, they would have 7 or, sometimes they would have sometimes 10, 11 locomotives on a train.
Yeah, I know with Conrail, they weren't even fitting the clear and the green anymore. They just had the red.
Right. So, again, take your railroad practices. But one of the other things I pointed out in this particular episode, and I'm not sure how well it'll be caught on camera here, because we've got the second camera over here, but the nose lights, I've been looking at a lot of pictures. One of my friends, Jerry Day, has been sending us a lot of pictures of diesels on the Rio Grande. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them, you see the top light, which is your headlight, and then the nose light, which is your Mars light, equally illuminated.
Yeah. And
then they'll say, you see videos, and they're both solid. And I started asking some questions, and what I found out was that there was one switch in the cab that would turn on the light, and another switch that would gyrate the light. Mm-hmm. There was a full run and then a bump. Mm. And the bump would take that Mars light and just kind of bump it a little bit. So the reason on this particular model, I left it as a solid light, but when you blow the horn, one of the features of our decoder, when we blow the horn, you can now see that Mars light is starting to flash back and forth.
Pulse, yeah.
And so this is what's called crossing logic. So this is something you can do on any of our lighting effects, and there's different ways, there's different states of
depending on what lighting effect it is, it may have different behavior.
So,
but generally what it does is whatever the lighting output is, so it can also be used for ditch lights, for example.
Correct.
It'll keep those lights on solid until you blow the horn, and then they'll start flashing.
Mm-hmm. So I put this on here because I've seen instances of both, and I've seen videos of the Grand engines, and this isn't just specific to the SD40T-2 that's here. It's, any of the stuff, the GP40s, the GP30s, all the stuff that they had. I've seen pictures and videos of them solid, and I've seen pictures and videos of them flashing. So I chose to do this particular method. But what was interesting was talking to the engineer, the former, according to him, it was called the Rio Grande. So go figure that out. But anyway,
have that debate down in the comments. It boosts engagement.
There you go. But he was telling me that they would sometimes bump the light, and so the Mars light would slightly gyrate. So if they were coming around a curve, they could move that Mars light to look down the curve instead of straight ahead as their locomotive hit the curve, which I thought was pretty interesting. Yeah. It was a pretty cool, neat little thing to learn about. Obviously, there's not really a way to do that in our models because they're just LEDs behind. If somebody can create an HO little mechanism that's going to move our lights and gyrolite them in that case. By the way, don't take that as a challenge because I don't want to have to install it.
Somebody's going to do it now, you know that, right?
I know. But anyway, it was just a neat little thing that I thought was kind of cool. And so, when I did my talk, that was some of the stuff I brought up with it. But this is a neat engine, and so I figured I can throw in some Grand stuff and mix it with my Missouri Pacific SD40s on my coal trains when I run them.
There you go.
Because it would be perfectly logical. They interchanged themselves in Pueblo, and there was actually interesting, there was a Mopac passenger train called the Colorado Eagle, and it serviced all the way to Denver. Okay. But what it did is it came across Kansas into eastern Colorado, came into Pueblo, looped around the city of Pueblo, and stopped at the depot. The Missouri Pacific crew got out, the Rio Grande crew got in, and they took it all the way to Denver. The passengers never had to get off.
Huh.
So it was kind of a neat thing. Like I said, there's a lot of cool stuff I learned that weekend. But anyway, so I think that's pretty much enough about this particular model. But I've been loving the Grand.
That I do want to mention is a lot of stuff is a lot more railroad specific than a lot of people think it is. I'll get questions, people asking, what horn should I use on an SD40-2? Whose SD40-2 is it? Because the horn and the lighting and a lot of those behaviors are very railroad specific. Pretty much one of the very few things that you can choose by locomotive is the prime mover and the air compressor, but other than that, a lot of it is actually a lot more railroad specific than you might expect.
Correct. In this particular case, I know Missouri Pacific used a lot of the Leslie RS3L.
Yeah.
This one's obviously very different.
Yeah.
Do you know what this one is?
No, not off the top of my head.
It's actually a P3.
Really?
P3.
Okay.
So they use those P3s on those things. So it's actually a pretty neat thing. And then those Amtrak engines I had not long ago, the two models actually had different air horns.
Okay.
One had the K5LA and the other had a P5.
Huh.
So that's to your point. So do your research, and that's one of the reasons why we give you 44 different air horns to choose from, is so that you can find the one that matches the model that you're working on. So, well, that's enough about this. I know you don't have a model in front of you per se.
Correct.
But you do have something that you've been working on.
Correct. If any of you are in the N-scale circles, you've probably seen the little Kato Steeple cab electric switchers from their pocket line. I decided to take one of these and try and do something interesting with it. So at the time in my N-scale, I'm actually modeling Conrail right about when it was formed in 76. Mm-hmm. What I'm doing is sort of an alternate history, where Conrail decides that their route to profitability is not rationalization of what they did, but rather electrification. So Conrail fully electrifies.
The horrors. A proto-freelance.
Yes.
Oh no.
So,
I'm coming, Elizabeth. I'm coming. I'm just kidding.
But what I'm doing is I'm actually decided to do a little bit of a kit bash. So where what I'm doing is I'm taking one of these Kato Steeple cabs and I'm going to modify it to emulate if one of the New Haven Steeple cab electrics had survived into Conrail ownership. So I'm going to be going out on this thing. I'm going to be painting it in the Conrail blue. I'm going to be wiring it up with headlight backup light. The trick, though, is, as I'm sure you're aware if you've ever seen one of these things, there's not a lot of room. Not even one of our mobile decoders would fit into it. So I actually had to go to another company's decoder. In this case, I used the DigiTraxx DZ126T, and I chose this decoder for a very specific purpose. Because we have a sound system that works with DCC for models that don't have that enough room for a true sound decoder, our SurroundTraxx system. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty neat because what it does is it hooks into the DigiTraxx transponding, and it uses that to detect the location of the locomotive, and it can run 5 or 6 sound zones, depending on if you have a subwoofer or not, because it can actually drive a subwoofer as well.
And use the phrase up to
Yes.
5 or up to 6 on the individual SurroundTraxx units, because if you have
you can run it in a lower channel
correct
mode,
you
but
don't have to have all 5 of them,
correct,
or 6 of them running.
But it can use that transponding information, and you can configure it to have the sound follow the locomotive around to whatever transponding zone it's in. So that locomotive is still in pieces on my desk. I need to finish painting it because I'm having to strip everything off.
And you're painting that in the Conrail blue?
Yes,
that's going to be a cool looking engine. Yeah. I think when you're done.
Yeah, I'm. One of the things I'm running into is because I'm using it's orange. The plastic itself is orange.
Oh, gotcha.
So I'm having to try and overcome that.
That's what primer's for.
Yes, I haven't used enough yet. I can still see the orange.
Excuse me.
I'm having to use a few layers.
Gotcha. Do you have an airbrush, right?
Yes.
I thought you did.
Yeah.
Okay. So then that should make it pretty easy, so it's not too thick, but enough. But that's a cool thing. So for those of you guys who aren't familiar with our SurroundTraxx unit, the SurroundTraxx, as he mentioned, works with the DigiTraxx transponding. Yes. The transponding decoder that he put into his steeple cab actually is able to put an identification signal onto the rail that the DigiTraxx transponder can detect.
Yep, so it knows where it is.
So it says, like, say, for example, on this section of track here, let's say we have block
A and block B.
Right. I was going to use DigiTraxx numbers, so it's DigiTraxx 2, block number 2, and block number 4.
Okay.
And what will happen is, let's say, for argument's sake, this has that transponder. Well, this is sending a message that the transponder is seeing that says, hey, locomotive 5375 is located in block 2. But as soon as I cross this barrier, now this is transmitting from block 4, so the DigiTraxx system identifies that locomotive is now in block 4. So what our SurroundTraxx system does is
it's hooked into LocoNet, so it's able to see that message in the DigiTraxx LocoNet bus and it can move the sound appropriately. So when it moved past the block divider, the sound would have followed the locomotive.
Correct. It'll fade off and you can pick the fade rate. So what's your normal transition speed?
It'll sort of fade up, down in the original block, and then while it's fading up in the second block.
Exactly. So this is a really cool product, especially if you're in the smaller scales, whether you're N scale or Z scale, and you don't want to go out and try to figure out how to put sound decoders and everything. Let's say you're a Z scale guy and you don't want to have a trailing boxcar in every locomotive. You should look at our SurroundTraxx system because
it's becoming less and less necessary in N scale, but for a lot of switchers, it is still necessary.
Yep.
Eventually, I'm going to try and. Nobody's made anything that's a suitable base for it, at least that I've found, but I want to scratch build a PRR B1 and put it in Conrail Blue at some point, and that's probably going to be another one I'll have to do a similar setup.
Gotcha. So, but anyway,
that's future project.
If you are in one of these smaller scales, feel free to check out the SurroundTraxx unit. We don't have a whole lot of videos on it. If you have any questions, give us a call. We'll help answer anything.
Yep.
You can look at the manual, and you can look at
manuals online on our website.
And so forth. And part of the reason we don't have a lot of videos on it is because it's really hard to display through a camera.
Yeah.
Because the sound travels from this speaker, let's say, that you've assigned to this section, to this speaker that's over here. You've got microphones and so forth on the cameras and around us. How do you pick up? How are you able to display that sound transition? And that's part of the reason why we don't spend a lot of time doing videos on it, but the product's still here, and we've actually got a special price on it right now. So for those of you guys, go to the website, check it out, SoundTraxx.com, check out the SurroundTraxx. And the best part is it's still a DCC-based product.
Yes.
So you can still use your DCC and sound on board decoders on your track.
You just don't set them up in the SurroundTraxx
Correct.
system.
You just don't build a profile in the SurroundTraxx system so that way your sound for those locos will come out of the loco, but then the ones you can't put the speakers on will then come out of the speakers that you've hidden around your layout, giving the illusion the sound's on board so that way nobody really loses that experience when they're running their trains.
Yeah. And the other thing is if you have a really big layout, if you have more than 6 transponding zones, you can chain multiple SurroundTraxxes together.
Yep. And when the locomotive is detected in that zone of let's say SurroundTraxx A, then it'll play the sound. But when it crosses and goes over to the second zone, which is assigned to SurroundTraxx B,
once it's out
excuse me.
Once it's out of the zone for the first SurroundTraxx, that SurroundTraxx is basically just going to quiet everything down and not play anything for it because it recognizes, okay, these are my 6 transponding zones, or 5 or 4 or whatever. It's outside of those, so I'm not going to play anything for it. And then the second SurroundTraxx says, oh, that locomotive has entered one of my zones. I'm going to play the correct sounds for it.
Exactly. So there really isn't any downside of SurroundTraxx. It really is a complementary.
Yeah.
And if you're really clever, you could actually enhance the low frequencies of a locomotive that has the sound.
Because it does have the option for the subwoofer.
Well, that and we have the equalizer.
Yes, that
too. So the 7-band equalizer, you can cut all the frequencies below a certain frequency on your onboard locomotive, and then on the SurroundTraxx, cut all the frequencies above a specific frequency, so that you take advantage of that subwoofer. So
that's also an option.
Definitely a great thing. So take a look at it, guys. Check it out.
I just decided to use it for this locomotive because there was no room for anything else.
And like that kind of goes with what we were talking about with the last podcast, where we were talking about space, that the HO guys are blessed with a bunch of space. This is a key example of not having the space in the N scale.
I mean, a lot of locomotives do, a lot of the big road locomotives you can fit sound in, but once you're talking switchers, unless it's specifically designed for sound, Bachmann's BR Class 8 is actually a neat little example of that.
Yep.
But they, once you get into the switchers, sometimes you do have to go to a smaller decoder and use the SurroundTraxx to get the sound out of it.
Gotcha.
So.
Well, there's a little glimpse into some of our projects that we've been working on, and then a little bit of a shameless plug for the SurroundTraxx.
Yes.
But it really is a neat product. It's something we've been excited about. It just, because it's relying on a third-party product, and not everybody has Digitrax, and not everybody has hooked up the transponding, so the market is pretty small. But take a look at it, because the transponding, it's
a niche product, but for the niche it's designed for, it's really useful.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, I say, what do you want to call it? We'll save this other topic that we had. We'll save that for a future video, a future podcast. So with that, well, I guess that's it. This is this episode of Train Talk from Outpost 141. This is the SoundTraxx Sound Bites
Don't
podcast.
Don't say blog.
Podcast?
New invention.
I'm infecting your brain. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Please comment below if you have any questions, thoughts, and we're again recording this before TrainFest, so I don't remember if this is going to be released before TrainFest. I haven't looked at the schedule, but if it is, great. We hope to see you there. If this is released after TrainFest, then I hope we saw you there and have a great time.
Bye.
So thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.